Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Well, I think all those tries were worth it. Here is the guitar with 3 coats of clear on it. Check out that effect. I think it's working. Yeah, I think you guys can probably see what's going on there. Oh, that's wild. I love this stuff. Anyway, that was 3 coats. Everything's feeling pretty good. There are a couple imperfections. It looks like there might have been a contaminant or 2 in my gun that ended up kind of in some of these horn areas. So it doesn't matter. I'm going to sand it back and add another couple coats of clear anyway. But I'm pretty happy with how this is looking right now. So that's next up on the list. We sand this guy back flat, and then yeah, a couple coats, and we should be good to go ahead and polish, and then we can start assembling. This thing's actually almost done. That's almost felt like it was never going to happen. So I'm going to fire up the compressor and jump into voiceover here because it is loud, and why waste time? So that's what we're going to do. I'm using my Dynabrade sander, my finishing sander, like I do always, and my Mirka Abralon 1000 grit here is what I'm going to sand this down with. Don't go any finer than that or your next coats won't stick properly. So that's the plan for right now. If you want any of this stuff, the Dynabrade sander, the Abralon pads, I've got 1000, 2000, and 4000. That's what I generally use for polishing. All of that is available in the Amazon link in the description as usual. So I'm going to fire up the compressor and get started on this. These are nice. They're nice and padded. They work really well for this sort of thing. We're going to get this guy sanded down. Obviously, I'm going to have to go by hand in some areas. And then we're going to fire another coat or 2 or 3, 2 or 3 coats on here. And let this harden for a day or 2. Actually, given my schedule, it'll probably be longer than that, unfortunately. But for this 2K stuff, ideally, you only want it to harden for a day or 2 because it gets harder and harder to sand after that. But so be it. So we're going to let it harden, and then we're going to come back, flat sand it, and polish it. You've all seen me do this before, but hey, you're going to see me do it again. So let's get after it.
All right, you guys probably mostly know the drill on this stuff by now, but hey, we're going to talk about it anyway because that's what I do. So again, I'm just going in here and flattening this out and scuffing it up properly so that my new layers will stick. The reason for this is when I did the patterning work on this aluminum, I left some texture. That's kind of part of how it works. You end up scratching it up and you leave some texture. And I wanted to make sure that I could get a nice flat finish on here, and I also wanted it to have a nice deep look. Now, you don't need a ton of clear coat to get a nice deep look. You will have seen at the beginning with the 3 coats that I had on there. It looked good. It looked nice and deep. But nonetheless, we're going to go in with a few more coats to be on the safe side and to make sure we've got lots of room for leveling at the end. So the objective here is to get this as level as possible right off the bat without sanding through, and to make sure that the surface is prepared and ready for another set of coats. And we're probably going to do, like I said, 2 or 3 coats on this second round. So I notice I've got some high areas here, right around the pickups, right around the cutouts. The clear coat tends to build up in a strange way around edges and stuff like that. So what it'll do is it'll form kind of a ridge where it's higher, and then right on the edge or right on the corner, it will be thinner. So you have to be very careful when you're doing this sanding that you don't sand through, of course. So you don't want to sand too much right on an edge, but if you use something flat, you can sand over that ridge to flatten that out, bring it down to the same level before moving on. And if you're careful, well, you don't sand through your clear coat. That's the objective. Now the padded 1000 grit Mirka Abralon pad that I was using just wasn't doing it. It wasn't cutting through that ridge quickly enough, and it kind of molds around it a little bit, so it wasn't great for taking that down. So now I've got this round sanding block, and I'm using some 400 to kind of make sure I get in there nice and quickly to get that dealt with. Then I'm going to come in with 800, and that'll basically be my final sanding before I move on here to the next round of clear coat. 800 is a good grit to use before clear coat. It's what I generally recommend. I don't have those Abralon pads in 800. I have them in, like I said, 1000 grit, 2000, and 4000 because I mostly use them for polishing. So I don't mind going back in with those. They leave a really nice smooth surface, and the clear coat will bond to that 1000 grit, but don't go any further than that. You don't want to be doing 2000 or 4000. Some people seem to be under the impression that if you get a glass smooth surface under your clear coat, it will come out glass smooth. That's, well, not really the case. It kind of is, but it also won't stick properly. Your clear coat will generally fill in anything above a 600 grit, maybe even a 400 grit scratch, and still come out glass smooth. So you don't have to worry too much about that. Now, this is a tangent, but if you're spraying metallics, metallic will collect a little bit in a 400 grit scratch, and you'll be able to see it after. So don't do that. Go a little smoother on that, use an 800 or 1000 before you spray a metallic. Anyway, back on track here. I'm using an 800 grit pad here to finish it off, like I said, and this will be the last grit that I do before I come back and spray. I've started with the front. I also have to do the rest of the guitar. Obviously, the front and back are the easy part. They go a lot quicker, but luckily the sides generally don't need as much work. You've seen that I spray them first, and you will see that I continue to spray them first as we go through the process before I do the front and back. I've explained why I do that, but just briefly, it's so that the overspray from the sides gets on the front and back, and then I cover it so I don't have to worry about having that kind of misty overspray in my finished product. The front and back are the most important parts, right? Now don't forget to keep your sanding pad clean, as you'll see me kind of doing here. As you go through the process, you can do that by sanding it against a rag and operating it if you're using a pneumatic or electric sander. I do that a lot, or sometimes I use my jeans. You can also use a compressor to blow out the sanding pad. That works quite well. And keep checking it. If you're using inexpensive sandpaper, you'll find that it pills up really quick. It gets little build-ups of the paint on it, and those little pills, as we call them, are pretty hard. And if you let that happen to your sandpaper and you keep sanding, they can leave deeper scratches. And that's the opposite of what we're going for here. We're trying to smooth things out. We are trying to scuff it up, but we're not trying to scratch it up per se. We want a smooth, nice, even surface when we're done. On the back here, you can again kind of see that I'm getting those ridges around some of these areas that are cut out. This is a really strange guitar, of course. It's got a very interesting pattern cut out from the back, but you'll want to flatten those out a little bit. This flat 800 grit pad is doing reasonably well at that for me. But again, try not to leave those when you go in with your next coat. They just build up higher and higher, and when you're using poly, it builds in layers. So if you sand through one layer into the next, you can see the witness lines from that, unlike if you're doing it with lacquer. Now when it comes to sanding curves like you see me doing here, that's something that takes a little practice, a little experience to get good at. It's a little difficult to sand around curves, particularly with a pneumatic or electric sander. So if you're not used to it, I recommend that you do it by hand. You can start it with a sander, but there's always that chance that you're going to either burn through or change the shape a little bit. It's always safer to do it by hand, or using, better yet, a flexible sanding pad. A straight sanding pad, a normal one, obviously won't work in those areas, but the flexible ones do quite well, and they're pretty easy to come by. People use them for all sorts of curves and stuff on cars, and they work great for portions of guitars. For example, the larger curves around the outside of the edges, or the belly carve, or the arm cutaway. Stuff like that works well. Now, this part I'm just doing by hand with my finger. Normally you don't sand with your fingers, but if you're sanding a finger-sized space like I am here, then you absolutely can. So I've got some grit kind of a little bit going on in these bevels for some reason. They just aren't as smooth as I would like them to be. I sprayed them at kind of an odd angle and from two different angles, so it resulted in some imperfections, and that's why I'm going in here with, I believe, some 600 grit to take those out, and then I just smooth them out after with a little bit of 800 to get them ready for spraying. And I do this all around the guitar. Some of them are perfectly smooth, some of them aren't, but it doesn't matter at this point. I'm spraying over it, so even if it is perfect at this point, I need to go in and scuff it down so that I can spray over it again. Obviously, that next coat isn't going to stick to gloss, so I'm not just sanding out imperfections, I'm sanding the entire guitar to get it prepared for that next coat. You can see me using the compressor there to blow off the paper a little bit. I do that a few times over the course of this usually, so I imagine I will here as well. And when I'm done with all of these bevels, I will kind of hit all the roundovers if I need to. There aren't very many of them, I guess just on the back. and sand the edges of the guitar next. So that I'm also going to do by hand. You know, after saying how easy and accessible these flexible sanding pads are, I don't have one. I don't have one with me at the shop, which is hilarious. There probably is one kicking around somewhere, but if there is, it's not mine, and I don't know where to find it. Luckily, this is a pretty easy process, and I don't have to do too much sanding here because my sides actually look great. These edges are in good condition. They're nice and smooth, so I don't have to worry too much about coming in and sanding out a bunch of imperfections there. Once I finish up with that 600 grit that I was using initially to make sure that it was all smoothed down, you can see me using this padded piece of sandpaper. This is some 800 grit, and this is the closest I've got to a flexible sanding block. The sponge pad on the back helps. It kind of makes the thing flex in a more predictable way and takes out some of the pressure from using your fingers, so it avoids putting ridges in it. So that's a good option, yeah, those are nice in a lot of contexts for sanding, and they can help you get around a couple imperfections too here and there. As a final piece here, I'm coming in with my Scotch-Brite. I like to finish off with a red or gray Scotch-Brite in a lot of contexts in these harder to sand areas, the edges and stuff, because it's truly flexible and will get into any areas that you may have missed with the sandpaper, if any, and flex around any little imperfections and just make sure that everything's scuffed so that we don't have any delamination issues or any problems with any gloss left over preventing the next coats from sticking properly. This is probably an unnecessary step. It's a little bit ridiculous that I choose to do this afterward, but I do to be on the safe side, and you can see in camera right there that I had a little bit of a gloss spot, so this will be good for taking that out. It's also great for getting around those edges right on the corners where the paint doesn't build up quite as thick, because it doesn't really sand off paint. It doesn't remove as much material as sanding would. It just scratches it, so I don't have to worry about sanding through that edge as much. You just saw me clean it really quick with wax and grease remover. That's kind of the last step before going ahead and spraying it. So I've now set it up on my spray stand, and I'm mixing my clear coat, which is a 4:1 Omni clear coat from PPG. It's good stuff. I should be wearing a mask when I'm mixing it. I'm in a gigantic open room, so that helps, but it's really no excuse. I just put it on after when I went to spray. Actually, my full face mask, which is what I really should be using, isn't at the shop wasn't at the shop when I made this video. So I end up spraying using a half respirator. Luckily, I'm in front of a paint booth. And it's a pull paint booth, so it does take most of the fume and everything out of the air when I spray. But you really should use a full face respirator if at all possible when you're spraying this 2K stuff. The respirator that I have now is the absolute bare minimum and probably not good enough. I've got it cranked down real tight so I get a nice seal, and the booth prevents me from getting any paint like in my eyes or anything like that. But the full face is really what I should be using. If you're looking for a respirator, if you're going to be doing any kind of spraying, feel free to check out the Amazon link in the description. That is, I've got a full face and a half mask in there that you can take a look at if you want. And if you happen to purchase something through that link, well, it helps me out. In fact, if you go through that link and purchase something that isn't even there, it helps me out, which is kind of weird. Somebody bought, I don't know, like a Keurig the other day, and I got credit for it just because they clicked on my link and then searched it. Quite funny. Thank you to whoever did that. Anyway, so I'm going over this with my clear coat. I'm going to do 3 coats. I'm, as usual, spraying the edges first. I'm coming in and I'm doing a 50% overlap of my stroke. So I overlap 50% of my spray pattern with every pass, and I do it all in straight lines. Here we've got another angle. Same thing again. I'm using a DeVilbiss finish line gun for this. It's my favorite gun for clear coat that I have. I can't afford a Seta Jet or anything like that. And I'm using a 1.5 millimeter nozzle. This clear coat's a little bit thicker than some paints, right? These catalyzed clear coats generally are. And I need to output a fair bit of volume. So you want a reasonable size nozzle. You don't want to be spraying this through like a 0.8 minigun if you can avoid it. So I'm moving a fair bit of material here, and I've got a significant overlap, at least 50%, like I said, with each stroke. It's a little bit of a balancing act so that you don't end up with runs, but this stuff's fairly viscous, so it doesn't do that very easily as opposed to some other paints. It also dries to the touch reasonably quickly, so you don't have to worry about it flowing if you've got a low spot for a ridiculously long time, which is also nice. I don't bother filming all 3 coats. That would be a little ridiculous. We're going to move on now to the polishing process. So I've let this sit for a day. At this point, I actually came into the shop. This was back when everything was still open. So I came into the shop after work at like 9 p.m. to do this. And I'm quickly going in here with, I think, a little bit of 800 grit just to make sure that everything is nice and smooth and take out any imperfections. And then I'm going to come in with my higher grits after that. So I'll move from this 800 grit that I'm starting out with, just to get rid of any, orange peel or anything like that, up to the 1000 very briefly, and then 2000, and then 4000. And 4000 is a very smooth sandpaper, although you can get micro mesh all the way up to about 12,000, probably more than that, but that's the highest I've seen. That was in Mohawk's Buff and Polish kit, and it is actually awesome for taking out little imperfections. If you sand up to something like that, you've basically got a gloss already. For those who don't know, after the sanding process, of course, we're going to move on to our compound and our polish, and really what those are in liquid form are abrasives. So the compound is a finer abrasive than the sandpaper, and the polish is an even finer abrasive. So even during the compounding and polishing process, you are technically taking off a very, very small amount of material, but you're basically burning it back to a perfectly smooth, glossy finish while you do that. I do have to go in again around some of these edges to take off that ridge, because I want this to be nice and flat, of course, when I'm done with it, so that it's got, a relatively mirror finish. And I will have to go in by hand again and take out a few more substantial imperfections on the back, which is something ideally you would avoid, but it does happen now and then. Sometimes you have to go in and do that. Sometimes you have to sand it down and add another coat. It's just the way of painting. Occasionally there are a couple problems, and on this one I did have a couple on the back, but generally it turned out pretty good. It leveled out nicely on the front. I wasn't unhappy with it. It went well. The back, like I said, a couple more significant issues right kind of at the bottom here. You can see some dust filling into them there. So there are a couple small craters that will fill up with the sanding dust as you go, and I had to go in and sand more aggressively to get rid of those for the most part. I do have a large plate going on the back of this guitar because of the way it's designed. I have to, because everything mounts from the back. So I've got the large plate that's going to cover most of that anyway, and that is also cut out of aluminum. You'll see that as we get to the final assembly of this guitar in the next video, but for now, you'll have to take my word for it. So again, I'm sanding this at 800 grit, and I'm going to come in once again with those higher grits when all is said and done here. Now, I don't want a full gloss on the back. You guys may know this about me by now. I'm not a huge fan of full gloss. I like it in specific contexts, rather. I like it for metallics and stuff like that, and it's what I want on the front here because it gives the highest contrast and the deepest look for that sort of thing. But in general, I'm a big fan of a good semi-gloss or satin finish, and even the occasional matte finish, although they're not quite as durable. So on the back, instead of using a polishing compound and coming in with a polish after and getting this up to a full gloss, I come in with some finishing wax and some 4.0 steel wool, and I basically hand buff it out to a semi-gloss. And yeah, I'm fond of that. I like the way the wax feels as well when I'm playing, particularly on the back of the guitar to give a little bit more grip. And if we're being honest here, which I always try to be, black is the most difficult color to get a really nice polish on. And poly is relatively difficult to polish as well. It's not the hardest thing. This polyurethane isn't as hard as, for example, like a polyester finish, a pure polyester finish, but it's a lot more difficult than a lacquer. So when I go in here, and here I am with the Mirka Abralon to interrupt myself, coming in and smoothing this thing out to 4000 grit. But when I go in on the back, if you've ever tried to polish black, you'll find that there's a lot higher chance of leaving swirl marks and stuff like that. Just minor imperfections, minor hazing, that sort of thing, that just makes it look not quite perfect. So when I'm doing a black finish like this, if I think it's going to look just as good or better, I will opt for a semi-gloss because it's just an easier finish to get right. It looks more professional when it's done than having a black finish that just isn't quite right with the gloss. So that's how I've gone through this. I've left the belly carve full gloss unsanded at this point because it just came out perfect. There was no reason to even sand it. There was no orange peel. It looked great, and so did the edges of the guitar, luckily, which is nice because they are not only difficult to sand but also much more difficult to polish than the rest of the guitar. You basically have to do the insides of the horns by hand and the rest using a smaller pad. So I was fortunate that I got to avoid that. So even though we had some imperfections on the back, the sides and the belly carve were excellent. So there was no reason for me to sand and polish them. And keep that in mind. If you get a finish straight out of the gun or out of the can that you are perfectly pleased with, then you don't need to polish it. The leveling and sanding process add nothing in terms of durability. They don't have an impact on, how the finish will survive over time, or really, they obviously have an effect on how it looks, but only to the extent that their purpose is to level out the paint and then bring it back up to a perfect gloss. So if it comes out satisfactorily level from spraying it, then it will likely come out looking very nice and glossy, a really nice wet looking finish. So there's no reason to go in and sand that back if there's no imperfection to remove, if you don't need to smooth it out because somehow you got a coat with no orange peel. If you're happy with it, then so be it. That's perfect. Leave it the way it is. Most of us feel the need to go in and level sand and polish because a finish almost never comes out of the gun perfect. It basically never comes out glass smooth, and some finishes self-level better than others and end up looking really good enough for sure. But if you want that show car like glass finish, chances are you're going to need to sand and polish. You're going to need to flat sand it and come back in and polish it. And in some cases with some finishes, that can be quite difficult actually. The harder the finish, the harder it tends to be for this to work. And they all have different times that they need to be left before you can go through this process. For example, lacquer, the recommendation is generally to leave it for a month before you do this, unless it's a catalyzed lacquer, of course, or a pre-catalyzed lacquer even. With some of those acrylics like a Rust-Oleum or or a Duplicolor, you still want to leave that for 2 weeks to a month. Some people even leave the Rust-Oleum acrylics about 6 weeks before they go through this process. Now you can do it sooner than that, but there's a chance that it'll shrink and you'll end up with some problems. This stuff, if you leave it more than a day or two, it becomes very difficult to sand flat and very difficult to polish because it's harder. And the harder the finish is, after a certain point, the more difficult it is to go through this process because you want to be able to warm it up a little bit as you're polishing it. The polishing does that, and really get in there with these fine abrasives to bring that gloss back up. So what I'm using here are just some pads from Chemical Brothers, I think is the name of the company. They're available at the Amazon link in the description. It came with a set, so I got a full set of these in a variety of different, much like sandpaper, these pads have not quite a grit, but different ones that are for different things. So the black pad, for example, here is for the final steps as opposed to the pads that I started with. It's a matter of, I think, the porosity and how stiff they are and how dense they are. So these softer pads are used for the finishing steps. And I started out with some Norton Liquid Ice Polish, which is one that I'm very fond of. It's supposed to be a single stage, so to speak, so you just use the same polish. And I did use it with a couple of different pads. But I like to come in with the glazing putty basically after this 3M ultra fine machine polish to really finish up that gloss as my last step. The 3M is part of a 3-step process made by them. So they've got their compound, their fine machine polish, and then this ultra fine blue stuff. You can use that. It's a great system as well. I have used it. I'm fond of it. But I find the other way, the way that I'm doing it, the combination of the two a little bit more efficient. So I like to come in, like I said, with that Northern Liquid Ice and then finish off with this. And it's a little bit cheaper too to do it that way. So I'm fond of that. I also like the buff and polish kit, the medium and fine polish from Mohawk. Big fan of that stuff, but I prefer using it for lacquer. I don't like it as much for this catalyzed automotive grade polyurethane. There's no real reason. I just find that using polishes that are designed for show car finishes, I don't know, give me more peace of mind or something. They feel like they're working better, but really when I look at it at the end, they're probably about the same. In contrast to that, here I am coming in on the back of this guitar with some 4.0 steel wool, like I said, and a little bit of Minwax paste finishing wax, which is the opposite of a show car product. This is a wood finishing product, and in fact I've done some finishes using this stuff, and it's actually quite nice. Although I really like the blue paste wax, the blue label wax from Mohawk. But this product works particularly well for this, which is kind of coming in and buffing to a semi-gloss. So it looks a little bit messy as I'm doing it, but the concept is similar. What I'm doing is I'm using this 4.0 steel wool to buff this up to that semi-gloss and scratch it in a very fine way, right? Smooth it out, and then the wax is filling in all those little scratches so that when I come in and buff off the excess here shortly with a cloth, you're going to see it get pretty shiny. So it's going to come up to a full semi-gloss look as soon as I do that part. And that'll just be in a second here. I just want to make sure that I've got everything, that everything looks like it's nicely smoothed out, and then I can come in and take off the excess wax, and you'll see right here, yeah, there it is. Nice and smooth semi-gloss look. Takes a little bit of elbow grease. Apparently I'm rubbing so hard that I took some of my masking off the inside of the cavities, but hey, it looks good when it's done. You can see the reflection there, a little bit of my hand and whatnot. So it's nice and smooth, but it's not a full gloss. All right, let's fast forward through the rest of that process, because how much do you need to see me rub something with a cloth, honestly? And yeah, moving on, I'm going to also quickly finish off the neck here. We're coming up on the end of what has turned out to be a fairly long video, so I won't spend long on this. What I'm using is Mohawk's modified tung oil. It is, I would say at this point, yeah, without a doubt, my favorite product for finishing necks. It dries much faster than normal tung oil. It creates a nice low sheen finish that is very smooth to play. If you're someone who's been playing a gloss neck for years and years, maybe you prefer those. I do not, and a lot of people don't. So this dries to a low sheen and is slippery. It's easier to move your hand around. It doesn't kind of stick like it does on a gloss finish. Yeah, it feels great to play, and it looks good. It's got a nice hue to it, a little bit of a honey color, and it works great on a fretboard as well. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm applying it to the fretboard. If you're paying really close attention, you can see I missed a little spot next to the first fret, which drove me nuts when I was editing this video, because I was looking at it going, I don't have the guitar in front of me. I know I got that. Did I get that? When am I going to get that? So spoiler alert, I do go back and get that and fix it. But what I do here is I apply kind of a light coat, make sure I've got a nice shine on there, and then I wait not very long at all, and I come back in and kind of buff off the excess. This stuff is not quite the same as if you were doing this with a lemon oil or a pure tung oil or another, very thin oil. This stuff has a little bit more body to it, so it's not going to soak in quite the same, and it is going to create more of a finish, which means you want to leave only a very thin layer on there. You don't want to leave it drying on there for a very long time, or at least I don't when I do this. You're seeing in real time exactly how I do it. I leave it on for just a few seconds as I go down the length of the board, and then I come back in and basically take off the excess and buff it a little bit while it's pretty much still wet. It does dry fairly quickly, but there you have it. Board looks much nicer, and I go ahead and add another coat on the back here, just a thin one, and that's it. I don't generally like to build up like 25 coats of oil like you see some people do. It's fine if you can get a nice hard finish out of it, but if I'm going to do that, I'll just use paint. Anyway, we're coming up on the end of, like I said, a very long video here, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate it, and remember to subscribe and tune in for the next one. We're going to get this thing assembled, finished off completely, and tested. So hopefully it sounds good, because it's been a lot of work, and it's been the most complicated guitar I've ever built. Again, thanks for watching. Have a good one. See you next time.